So now we're going to cover 8.10 waste reduction methods. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe changes to current practices that could reduce the amount of generated waste and their associated benefits and drawbacks. So we're mainly going to focus on recycling and composting. So recycling is a process by which certain solid waste materials are processed and converted into new products. So recycling can reduce the current global demand on minerals. The big problem and why a lot of recycled materials is not used is because it requires a lot of energy intensive. It's energy intensive and it can cost a lot of money. So some countries, some industries don't want to worry about recycling when they can just make a new product for cheaper. However, this has led to the myth of plastic recycling, where in reality, some landfills report that they end up just taking all their recycling and dump it back into the landfill anyway because there's nothing to do with all those plastic bottles. So recycling should actually be the last of our reduce, reuse, recycle. We have a lot of other things we can do. We can reduce our use, we can recover usable products, we can refill, refuse to use it at all. You can repair things to keep using it, repurpose or upcycle. You could regift it. Maybe somebody else still has usable purpose. Try to reuse things, restore them to their functional purpose, rethink what you do with them, or rethink how you use that product, so maybe you don't even need it. And then if all of these things are done, then you can consider recycling, which probably still ends up in a landfill. One interesting idea I came across recently is this thing called Networks, where they're taking fishing lines, recycled fishing lines out of the ocean, which is a big problem for marine animals being trapped in these floating fishing lines. Sharks as well get trapped in these discarded fishing lines and then get stuck there till they die. So this company is paying poor fishermen, to collect these recycled discarded nets, and they're recycling them into carpets. Another way that we can impact how much waste is going to the landfill is composting. So this is taking organic matter such as food scraps, paper, and yard waste, and decomposing it and using it as fertilizer. Problems with this: odor and rodents. So you can do this anywhere, even in a small bucket. You don't need a lot of land, but there is some odor and it can draw in rodents. Agricultural waste can also be dealt with as compost. So for the most part, it's composted on site, but for some, they have to treat the waste by putting it in a pool to kind of treat it as if it was wastewater. Problems with this is it's high in nitrogen and can lead to eutrophication, which we've mentioned a few times in passing, but we're going to look at that a little bit further later on. So what's interesting is I mentioned before that paper, yard trimmings, and food scraps are the biggest sources of municipal solid waste in the United States. And a lot of that could be taken out before it even makes it into your trash can. There's also something called integrated solid waste management, which is using a combination of the waste prevention, recycling, and composting before getting to the idea of just putting it in a landfill. So rather than using landfills as your first stop, you're going to just reduce the amount that you need of something, then look at recycling and composting, looking at converting to more sustainable technologies, and last but not least, putting it in a landfill. Problems with this is it requires a whole shift in our way of thinking and can be difficult to manage and implement. So to summarize, we talked about recycling, which is converting into new products. It can reduce the global demand on minerals, but it's energy intensive and can be costly. You can compost organic matter. I didn't mention e-waste, but we can recycling and reusing some of the components inside of our electronics. Because these things can enter our landfills and leach into the groundwater because they contain the hazardous chemicals. But recycling and reusing these precious metals inside of our E-waste can reduce the amount of mining that we need to do for virgin new materials. So, as mentioned in the previous video, we can take the gases from the decomposition of the landfill, that methane, and use it to generate electricity. Oh, we don't want to go to Google. We want to stop recording.